Now I'll write my stuff out. And my eyes. Jambahadu Singh was a very short, stocky man with a broad face and barrel-chested, the way you would expect a military general to be. This was perhaps a genetic nod to his Gurkha roots, or perhaps his posture was to make up for the fact that he stood only at 5'3" tall or short. His facial features were very Mongolian, and in his older age, he wore round-rimmed spectacles which enhanced his intellectual persona. My name is Varuna. I am the third of 9 children of his daughter, Rajkumari Singh. Myself and other grandchildren called JB Singh Grandpapa. I could always pick him out in a crowd because there was something about him that he radiated. He was like a magnet. He grew the good, the bad, and the ugly alike into his sphere of influence and made them work together for the common good. He believed that we should look for commonalities and create relationships on that basis, that as we learn to trust each other, we can negotiate differences. It was the 1950s, and Guyana was a British colony in a state of progressive transition. Students were still receiving exercise books with King George's picture on the front and later Queen Elizabeth II. Guyana at the time had one of the finest and best local government systems throughout the entire Caribbean, which brought visitors from other Caribbean islands to observe and learn from it. But the seeds for an independent nation were being planted. 273 Lamahar Street, named Ayodhya, the home of Dr. JB Singh, was one of these places where the seeds were being sown. My cousins and I thought it was normal to have strange guests over each night. All kinds of people came and went in droves, and we were all taught to show the same respect to each and every one who came to Ayodhya, including farmers, as we did the British colonials. I understood early on that Lamahar Street was a political, cultural, and social mecca. Dinner guests included the governor of the colony, politicians, leaders of the Indian, Portuguese, Chinese, and black organizations, workers from charity organizations, union members, emerging business people, and returning university graduates that Grandpapa and the BGEIA encouraged to study abroad. He always made sure he invited a wide cross-section of society. He enabled these different social classes access to one another. As a very young boy, I was probably 4 years old. And don't ask me why I have such a vivid memory, but I do have a very vivid memory of everything that went on at Lamahar Street since I was 4 years old. I once remember at an event where an Indian farmer walked up to the British governor in the living room at 273 Lamahar Street and said, "Chief, me land there underwater and nobody now do nothing." And the governor stood there listening and promised it would be resolved. In just 1 week, it was resolved. I remember there would always be students and other young folks around who he would always purposely draw into conversations with senior members at the events. Mentoring was part of his very being. JB Singh did not have any contemptuous relationships with anyone, although few had contemptuous relationships with him. JB Singh believed in transitional approach of self-determination. Grandpapa's relationship with all of the emerging leaders was one of mentor. Many of the leaders of his and my time emerged through the tutelage of Dr. JB Singh, including Chetty Jagan, and Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham. If JB Singh were alive today and we had to politically place him in a modern context, he would not be a liberal nor a conservative. He would be a moderate who strongly supported local government and inclusion. The BGEIA's objective was to create a strong, viable Indian middle class, because the middle class protects the two extremes, the rich and the poor, and it sought parity within the power structures and the social stratas of Guyana. JB Singh was a strong proponent of self-determination at the very lowest level. He believed it was important to encourage Guyanese to become business people and professionals. And yet he also encouraged people in fields such as the arts and culture and agriculture. I remember him one day putting on a pair of Wellingtons, sitting on a tractor and riding with a farmer through his agricultural lands, looking at the problems that he was facing. And when he got back to Georgetown, he would pen a letter immediately to the colonial government to have these issues resolved. He was a giant mediator. JB Singh did not like financial nor political greed and abuse. He even disliked when people attempted to bow to him in public. Sometimes when he was given garlanded with malas, he would turn to someone else and give it to them. His chauffeur, Arthur Lloyd, who was the father of our famous cricketer Clive Lloyd, was his chauffeur along with his medicine dispenser. And early in the morning they would outfit the trunk of his 1950s grey Buick, of which I had the privilege to sit in the back seat. And starting around 5:30 a.m., he was well on his way through the rural areas of the East Bank and East Coast of Demerara. And let me remind you, back in those days, those roads were very, very bad. I thought we were going to another country. The folks would stick white flags on the street and along the side streets to indicate they needed a doctor. He serviced all kinds of ailments, including the flu, which was very common and which could be very deadly to those without place access to city hospitals. He never charged any money for his services, nor for medication. To me, this entire trip was an adventure. And looking across at my grandpapa, who was cheerfully making objects out of paper mache, a hobby of his, I realized that it was an adventure for him too. He always sang during these trips, especially an old Gurkha Nepalese folk song he learned when he was a very young boy from his father, JB Singh. The first line goes something like this. Mayala beli titali, achalaba, Mayala beli titali. And he sang the song the loudest when he was in his bathtub. Funny thing is, after he passed away, and I got the privilege of seeing many of his all other brothers, they also sang the same song. I remember these anecdotes so vividly because even from 4 years old, I was aware that I was in the presence of a very great human being who created a bright home, a loving family, and a genuine following. Speaking of family, Grandpapa always made sure all his children, his in-laws, and grandchildren were home around 11:30 a.m. for lunch. This is where everybody sat down at what we called the long table and freely discussed our personal lives. The older generation was enabled to educate the younger ones about adult life and society. Grandpapa would revel us with tales of his trips to India and the British colonies, since he traveled to and fro as a ship's doctor and translator. He was fluent in Dutch, Hindi, English, Sanskrit, Urdu, Bengali, and Nepalese. In his bedroom, he had this huge, gigantic closet, which was like a Pandora's box to me and all of my cousins. It had a very unique odor of cedar, cigars, and cologne. But more interesting to us, his grandkids, were the tons of postcards, stamps, and coins, and such, which told the story of his travels around the world. Today, I have many of those stamps. My brother Connor has many of his notations and photographs. Well unpaid bills for medical supplies and medicines built up. Granny, Alice JB Singh, his wife, decided to take stock of the situation. She came to the surgery and ensconced herself at the desk with the intention of collecting fees for services and medication, only to end up not only forgiving debts, but giving patients money to return home. Grandpapa sat in his Burmese chair that evening, and he turned and he asked Granny, "So Mama, how much money did you collect today?" And she bent her head to the side, pretending to sleep. And he simply smiled. We got the message. It was not only his forgiveness of medical fees, but his thoughtfulness. His kitchen, which was as large as this room, had 2 large cast iron 6-burner wood-burning stoves, which were constantly making food for patients who had to travel back far distances. And this dal, rice, pumpkin, bhaji, and baigan was donated by the business community, by people such as Risol Miraj, Francis Kewall, a lady by the name of Mrs. Willie Passal, who had a stall in Border Market, and many others. And these are people who gave with a deep sense of humanity and civic responsibility. They lived the Guyanese motto, hand wash hand, make hand clean. Grandpapa always believed that duty to your fellow man is the highest form of worship. And it is with that thought our parents, our uncles, our aunts passed on to us. We grew up understanding that duty to our fellow man was the highest form of worship. My grandpapa passed in 1956 at the age of 70, just before my 5th birthday. I slept on the floor next to his icebox in the living room, on a rug, listening to the water from the ice melt and drip into the pans beneath the icebox. And Granny and other elders could not remove me. I would get up every now and again and peek into the box, waiting for him to wake up. I thought he was just sleeping. I found out later he died of cancer of the stomach. It seemed like he took care of everyone else, but he himself ate a diet of soda biscuits during his hectic day and slept very few hours at night, always running helter-skelter to meeting after meeting for every organization imaginable. The BGEIA, for which he was president for many years, the Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha, the British Guyana Dramatic Society, the British Guyana Labour Party, the British Guyana Red Cross, for which his wife was president for 30 years, the YMCA, the YWCA, and I could go on and on. What made me realize that this person I knew as my chubby, jovial grandfather was a beloved and impactful man was his funeral. It was the first cremation that ever took place in Guyana. And I was overwhelmed by the amount of people that flocked our home, the yard, the streets, the city, and Ogle Seaside, dotted with countless ships and boats where he was cremated. People came from all over Guyana, from far distances. It was like all his good deeds had come back to say farewell to him. As many of me and my cousins got out of the car towards the funeral pyre, people just came in droves and lifted us up and carried us towards the pyre. JB Singh did not accomplish all that he did on his own. There was an army of people behind him, an army of organizations behind him. They supported him and carried him because they had absolute faith and trust in him. I saw their faces that day as they lifted us. After his cremation and immersion of ashes into the Demerara River, sealing his identity as a Guyanese icon, we were all sitting at the table reminiscing, and my granny said, as it was retold to me, when politics dominates a society at the expense of cultural, social, and business institutions, we will always be doomed to fail. JB Singh begat not only a legacy of politics and social development, but between himself and his wife, Alice, they also begat a unique family legacy of arts and activism. Their daughter Rajkumari Singh was the first published Indian woman from the Caribbean, and their grandson, Gora Singh, was a Kathak pioneer exponent. Another grandson, Karna Bahadur Singh, authored the book Temples and Mosques and helped bring Madrasi culture to light, and spent most of his life researching, sharing, and preserving records of and about JB Singh. Their granddaughter, Preeta Singh, is a cultural activist and dramatist. Grandchildren, Chitra Singh and Radha Singh and Dino Prasad are accomplished musicians and recording artists. His daughter, Nalini Prasad and Elfrida Singh were classical pianists, and his son, Pratap Narayan Singh, was a classical violinist. His eldest son, Dr. Hardat Singh, was a playwright, and his great-granddaughter, Sharda Shakti Singh, follows in those footsteps, also a playwright. At this point, I would like to thank Baytoram Ramharack for filling the gap, the many gaps that are missing in the history of Guyana. He has done so by unearthing Guyanese like Dr. JB Singh, whose stories have been buried for social and political reasons. He's also published a biography on Baytoram Singh Rai entitled Against the Grain, and the BGI, the British Guyana East Indian Association. And I will say, Baytoram Ramharack himself has gone against the grain with this biography on Jung Bahadur Singh once again. I thank you. Before I leave the podium, let me remind you that Baytoram has all three publications, Dr. JB Singh, Against the Grain, Baytoram Singh Rai, and the British Guyana East Indian Association books on sale. If you really want to find out about that lost gap in our history, you've got to read all three books. Thank you very much.